The Night Shift at St. Michael's Morgue by the Confused Camper. It was a cold, moonless night when Sarah pulled up to St. Michael's Morgue for her late shift. She had been working here for just a few months, but the eerie silence that hung in the air still made her skin crawl every time. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the sterile white walls, and the heavy door of the morgue creaked shut behind her as she entered. The night was going to be uneventful, she hoped. After all, the morgue had always been quiet at night, except for the occasional call from the hospital or the police. Most of the bodies were just waiting to be identified or claimed, but there had been strange rumors around the building. Rumors of bodies moving when no one was looking. Whispers in the halls. Cold gusts of wind in sealed rooms. But Sarah didn't believe in ghosts. She was a practical woman, and the macabre nature of her work had never bothered her. That was, until tonight. She settled into her small office at the back of the morgue, a room lined with metal shelves filled with paperwork and reports. The coldness was unbearable, and she shivered as she pulled on her jacket. The air felt heavier than usual tonight. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Another John Doe found by the river. "You're up, Sarah," the text read. Sarah sighed, grabbing her keys and heading down the narrow hallway to the autopsy room. As she passed the rows of steel drawers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, lurking just beyond the corner of her vision. The autopsy room smelled of antiseptic and formaldehyde. It was always like this. The body of the man, found lifeless by the river, lay on the table, already tagged with a small number on his toe. Sarah's mind drifted to the many bodies she had seen, but this one felt different. She couldn't explain why. As she moved closer, she felt an odd chill wash over her. The air grew dense. Her breath came out in small puffs, visible in the dim lighting. She froze as she caught sight of something. The man on the table, a young man with a grim, vacant stare, seemed too still, even for a corpse. But it wasn't just the stillness that unnerved her. It was the way his fingers twitched ever so slightly, as if beckoning her. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. Her rational mind screamed at her to keep working, to just ignore the sensation of dread creeping into her bones. But the quiet was suddenly deafening, and then the unmistakable sound of a breath, slow, deliberate, breathed into the cold room. She whipped around, her pulse racing, but there was no one there, only the shadows creeping across the cold walls. The body was still, motionless. Sarah leaned over it, her hand trembling as she began to lift the sheet covering his face. But before she could, a sudden, bone-chilling noise rattled through the morgue, a shriek so haunting that it shook her to her core. The sound seemed to come from everywhere. It echoed down the narrow hallways, vibrating the walls. Her legs refused to move, her feet glued to the cold tile floor. Another scream, this time followed by a soft thud. And then, a whisper, so faint she almost couldn't hear it. "Help me. Please. I'm still here." Sarah felt her stomach churn. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But as the seconds stretched into eternity, her breath hitched in her throat. The man on the table, his chest. It was moving, not in the way that it should have, not in a natural way. No. His ribs lifted and fell with a slow, unnatural rhythm, as if something inside him was struggling to break free. His fingers twitched again, more violently this time, and a grotesque groan escaped his lips. Sarah's hands shook, her mind screaming for her to leave, but she couldn't move. It was as if she was bound to the spot, unable to look away from the terror unfolding before her. The lights flickered once more, and in that brief moment of darkness, Sarah saw something that froze her to the core. The dead man's eyes were open, staring at her, wide with fear. "No," the voice whispered again, but now it was no longer coming from the body. It was coming from within her own mind, a voice only she could hear. She stepped backward, her legs finally responding as she bolted for the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she fumbled for the handle, but before she could escape, the lights went out entirely, plunging the morgue into a suffocating darkness. And then, a loud crash. A heavy object fell, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, like something wounded. Sarah spun around, her heart in her throat, her eyes straining to see in the blackness. But the room was silent once more. No movement, no breath. When the lights flickered back to life, the man's body was gone. The table was empty. She rushed out of the room, not daring to look back. Her hands were clammy, and she nearly tripped over her own feet as she ran down the corridor. She reached the entrance to the morgue, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but just before she could escape, the door slammed shut with an audible thud. A whisper echoed through the hallway, so close that she could feel the cold breath against her ear. "I'm still here." Sarah turned, but no one was there. The morgue was empty, save for the dead, but she knew deep down that one of them wasn't going to stay that way for long. The dead were waiting, and so was something else. She would never be the same after tonight. Thanks for watching, and please hit the like and subscribe buttons for more stories.